Let me pull up our agenda, and we are going to go with, why don't you, we don't need to do the roll call, I don't think, because we're not being all that formal today. So Nick, why don't you go ahead and get started with the presentation?
It works for me. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Monday morning. This is a meeting of the TPA's Strategic Plan Steering Committee. And as a reminder, Valerie, if you want to go to the second slide. This morning, we're going to cover, well, we've foregone the roll call. And just so you guys are aware, we don't have anyone joining the Zoom call right now as an attendee. So it looks like it's just the committee members as well as the TPA staff who are on the call right now. Nobody watching from the public, although it is a publicly advertised meeting, and therefore it's permissible for members of the public to sit in as attendees on this meeting and watch from home. So what we're going to do this morning is review the committee's charge, which is essentially and then we're going to evaluate the TPA's fiscal year 20 performance. We'll review the strategic plan action items and tell you a little bit about how each of those items has gone, or a handful of items we'll highlight for you. And then we're going to make some suggestions to you as to what kind of things we think we ought to focus on, what kind of changes we should make to the strategic plan that we have in place for our emphasis areas for fiscal year 21. And we're going to be asking you, after your discussion on those proposed changes, to make a motion to recommend approval of those modified action items for the fiscal year 21 strategic plan. And then we're done. So that's our outline. As far as the subcommittee's charge goes, the TPA board created a 7-member subcommittee at the May governing board meeting. So not this past week, but actually May 21st. And the subcommittee's charge is essentially to review our progress from the past year and to make recommended updates for the coming year. Those recommended updates are to be presented by the subcommittee, and you can either have Maria do it or you can designate someone as a presenter for the July 20. Margie, what day is our July board meeting? I should know that.
It is July 16th.
16th. So for the July 16th board meeting, to make those recommended updates and say you've spent the time and kind of taken the dive into the strategic plan and recommend the content to the TPA governing board that is going to be presented at July 16th at our TPA board meeting. And if that's all clear and there are no questions on what we're doing this morning, then we'll dive right into the evaluation.
Go for it.
All right. So as far as fiscal year 20 goes, I guess what I wanted to say as a brief introduction, our strategic plan divides up our activities into 6 major goals, and then we have a bunch of subordinate activities to implement those various goals. But I think it's important to say on the front side that fiscal year 20, whether we like it or not, has probably been the most eventful year of the TPA's 43-year history. And what I mean by that is the TPA was originally formed in 1977. It was organized as the Palm Beach MPO. We've gone through a number of iterations as to who has voting membership and kind of expanded our roles and responsibilities over that 43-year period. But we started on a journey several years ago toward becoming an independent agency, and that journey was consummated in this past fiscal year. So that was a pretty significant shift. We have been hosted by Palm Beach County for 43 years, and we moved out from under that umbrella and are operating as a separate standalone agency for the first time ever. We also, immediately following our transition out from under the county's umbrella, we hosted a board meeting in February of 2020 that, largely due to the State Road 7 agenda item, was one of the largest meetings that we've ever conducted, if not the largest. So we immediately tested the capacity of our new facility, and then we were sued for the first time following that February board meeting, and that was, and so that's a monumental first for the agency to have a member entity file a lawsuit against us. And in the midst of all that, we have been navigating the first ever global pandemic of this scale and the kind of ways that it's been affecting our operations and affecting our conducting of meetings and whatnot, which led to, in June, conducting the smallest TPA governing board meeting that we've ever had, where we had 5 members in attendance in person and really 2 members of the audience and a handful of TPA staff members in the building. So it's been a crazy year. It's been a crazy year. And I wanted to kind of set the stage and say some of these things are, some of our activities and our ability to implement the strategic plan have been affected by some of these first ever occurrences from the past fiscal year. And then just one other reminder, because our funding is primarily federal grant funds, and those federal grant funds flow to the agency through the Florida Department of Transportation, we do operate on a state fiscal year, which means that June 30th is the end of fiscal year 20 for us, and July 1st is the beginning of fiscal year 21 for us. That's different than our local governments, that's different than our federal government, but because the funds are passed through the state of Florida, we are asked to operate on the state fiscal year basis. So when we talk about fiscal year 20, we're talking about the period of July 1st of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. That's what we're looking back on. So we've got essentially 8 days left in the fiscal year that we're currently operating within. So I'm going to dive right in and just mention a couple of things. And really, the way we want to do this is we're going to present to you. I'm going to talk about the past year, and then I'm going to ask Valerie to do a presentation of our suggested changes for the coming fiscal year. But as I'm talking about this past year, if you have any questions, stop me and let's talk through them. And we can use the discussion that we have right now as helpful information to guide where we want to go in the future. So under goal number 1, our first goal is engaging the public. We had 4 different action items, and the 2 I want to highlight is action 1A was to create an interactive comment map, a pilot for soliciting input from the general public, either on specific transportation projects and initiatives that we're working through, or general feedback on issues with the transportation system. And I'm going to be candid, we are excited about this and nervous about it at the same time. Excited because I think it's a very helpful tool. It's sort of in the vein of the 311 initiatives that have happened around the country that suggest that the public should have a means of submitting input to its local government on how the local infrastructure is being maintained, the cleanliness standards, the maintenance of whatnot, the stuff that's out in the world that local government is responsible for. We're also a little nervous that it'll become successful, and it will be difficult for us to demonstrate the kind of responsiveness that is expected if we start collecting feedback. So we'll see how it goes. But we really think it's a good initiative, and we're hopeful that we can share the information that we collect with the various entities that are responsible for their parts of a transportation system. So things like, and I briefly mentioned this in my director's report last week, but things like the bus stop the trash can is overflowing. We can route that to Palm Tran, who can route that to their maintenance vendor and say, okay, we have a complaint at certain bus stop about the cleanliness of the facility. Can you please go out and address that? Or there's a drainage issue on a road, and we can route that to the roadway owner and say, hey, there's a drainage issue. It seems to be flooding in moderate rainfall events. And maybe if you can go out and look into the causes of that, we can address it that way. I also wanted to mention on number 1 that we've done a lot on 1B, or rather 1C. We've done a lot on outreach events this past year. I think our Safe Street Summit was a fantastic event in Broward County this past January, and we've had good experience with some of the walk to school day events that we did last fall. And then we've done some really interesting events trying to engage the public in virtual ways since we've been operating under the pandemic. But I think that one is in particular going to be a difficult initiative to maintain as we operate in a virtual world. on planning the system, the two I wanted to focus attention on were 2A, commencing multimodal studies on transit plan corridors. And what we mean by that is, in our long-range plan, we identified an initiative that said we want to at least study the investment of significant capital dollars and operating dollars in a high-capacity transit network. And that's a phrase I want you to get familiar with, high-capacity transit network. We called it, this plan in our long-range plan, we called it the 561 plan because it had 5 north-south corridors, US 1, the FEC Railway, the CSX Railway, or Tri-Rail, Congress Avenue and Military Trail, those 5 north-south corridors. And then it also had 6 east-west corridors connecting to them. It was Glades Road in Boca Raton, Boynton Beach Boulevard, Lake Worth Road, Okeechobee Boulevard, Forest Hill Boulevard, and Atlantic Avenue and Delray Beach. So you have those 5 and 6 corridors that are intended to create one connected system, which makes for a very good moniker, given that our area code is 561. So we called it the 561 plan, and our goal is to study modifications to those corridors that would promote high capacity transit service. And we've started work on US 1 in Boca, we've started work on US 1 in Lake Worth Beach, and we're trying to get ramped up on Okeechobee Boulevard, which is one of the key corridors from an east-west perspective that would allow for at least an evaluation of high capacity transit service. Other one I want to highlight here is item 2B, and no, I'm sorry, 2D as in David, that we're working right now with a consulting firm on a couple of different initiatives. And one of those is to create this Smart Palm Beach website. And it's really going to be a web-based platform that's going to provide access to existing transportation planning and infrastructure data and allow for collaboration, utilization of that data, both by public sector partners and by potentially private sector consumers, entities that want to choose to develop basically technology innovations, applications of transportation data that will make the ability to navigate in our transportation system a little bit easier. And we've seen things, and we're kind of pushing the envelope here, but we've seen things like the Audi car company is consuming traffic signal data from local signal maintaining agencies and using that data to route the vehicle paths for their drivers as part of their navigation system based on not only the level of congestion on the roadways, but also the signal timing of the traffic lights. So they're actually picking the route that will give you the most likely path to get a green light and minimize the delay that you would incur because of traffic signals. Currently, Palm Beach County and Florida in general does not make our signal data available for private consumption like that. But we're pushing the envelope and saying, let's see if we can't make that kind of information available so that people can take advantage of that data and then make our transportation system operate a little more efficiently. Before I jump to the next slide, does anyone have any questions about either goal 1 or goal 2 that we want to talk through?
As I unmute, okay, just a quick question, Nick. On 1A, when you were talking about the interactive comment map, and do we actually have a designated person handling this, or how is that working?
As far as response to the comments that we received? Well,
does it get filtered to different people, or does it just go to one person and then filtered from there?
At this point, it's going through Melissa Booth in our public relations manager office,
okay,
just to monitor it as we wait and see how successful it becomes. But to the extent that it becomes a significant effort, we'll either have to assign a staff person or we'll have to outsource and assign a consultant contract to be able to manage that.
And what did we budget for this? Did we budget a salary for this?
At this point, we haven't. We have been able to develop the platform in-house using existing tools and resources we have available through our Esri, which is a GIS mapping application, our Esri platform and licensing. And again, we're waiting to see if it becomes wildly successful, in which case we'll have to devote more resources to it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? Rolling on.
Next slide.
All right.
There we go.
Prioritizing the funding is task or goal 3 rather. And the two I wanted to highlight here are, while we don't tend to submit applications for discretionary grants under 3C, we do try to support local governments' submittal of applications for funding. And so I wanted to highlight a few different things that we've done. First is a seaport, Port of Palm Beach submitted an application for a consolidated rail infrastructure grant, a CRISI grant, and the TPA was able to support that application. We'll see how they fare in the application process, but they're actually asking us to help them win discretionary dollars to increase the throughput and ability to offload cargo from the ships straight onto rail lines and build trains right there on the port. And so we're hoping that the Federal Rail Administration, who runs that grant program, will look favorably on their request. And then the DOT, the Florida DOT, actually identified a number of rail crossings and asked us to support their application for what they call dynamic envelope markings at some of our higher traffic crossings. And that's marking both sides of the railroad where a roadway crosses it with the high visibility yellow paint or thermoplastic markings to make people a little more aware that you are approaching a rail crossing and that you should not stop on those tracks if you're queued up waiting for a traffic light. Again, that's a rail infrastructure grant, and we wanted to support their application for those funds. Thing I want to mention to you as strategic plan committee members here is, while federal authorization does not allow for surface transportation program funds do not allow for earmarks or the designation of specific projects by members of Congress. What they have done is they've created a number of discretionary grant programs at the federal level that allow for a lot of influence by members of Congress in the selection of projects that are funded through those discretionary grant programs. And so one of the ways that we want to make sure that we act as a resource to our local governments is, if you identify projects that we need to fund or that we want to fund, and I'll even use Boca Raton as an example, as a partnership, Boca Raton is submitting an application, is a partnership with Brightline for infrastructure dollars to support the construction of the Brightline station in the city. What we want to do is act as a resource to demonstrate that the entity responsible for prioritizing federal funds in Palm Beach County, that's the TPA, responsible for prioritizing federal transportation dollars, is supportive of and in favor of the discretionary grant dollars that are being requested by the city going to that construction of that rail project. So that's one way we can act as a resource to demonstrate that we are unified in our request for that federal support. And then another way we can act as a resource is to work with our congressional delegation and ensure that they are fully informed of the requests that are being made locally, and that they can go and reach out to the decision makers in the federal USDOT different branches, the Federal Rail Administration, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and say, guys, this is a project that we need to get behind. This is an important connecting facility for our local communities. Let's see if we can't make it happen. And frankly, sometimes those letters are more impactful than even the kind of impartial scoring of applications that are submitted for federal grants. So that's on 3C, and then 3E, just working on again, the federal reauthorization. And the thing I want to make the committee members aware of is, on a federal scale, we are operating under a program right now called the FAST Act, Fixing America's Surface Transportation. That was a 5-year funding program that set up rules and grant programs and formula funding systems that ran through the end of fiscal year 20, which means on a federal scale, the FAST Act expires on September 30th of this year. And we are working through the MPOAC, which is our statewide organization of MPOs in Florida, as well as AMPO, which is the national organization of MPOs in America, and NARC, which is the National Association of Regional Councils in America. We're members of both of those national agencies. So we're working through those entities as well as working through the MPOAC to advocate for reauthorization at a federal level of transportation that gives more flexible use of dollars to local governments to be basically selected by the local TPA governing boards that exist around the country, because we understand that the decisions that you are being asked to make and the infrastructure needs of a local community are best understood by local government. And we want to put more money in your hands to be able to implement projects that matter to our local communities. So when we say we're advocating for law and policy changes, one of the things we're doing at that federal level is to say, let's try to break down some of the silos so that if we have a transit project that needs funding that is important to our local governments, we can potentially fund that with the same kind of money and the same rules and conditions that you would use to fund a road widening project. Historically, they've been two separate systems, and roads get built this way, transit projects get built that way, and nary the twain shall meet. And one of the things we're saying is let's break down some of those silos and give our local governments the flexibility to choose the kinds of investment that make the most sense and do the most good for our local communities. As far as the implementing the projects, goal number 4, what I wanted to highlight is 4A. We are continuing to work carefully and closely with the county, with the DOT, with our cities to say, look, we know that the TPA does not convey authority over how you build projects, but we do represent a collective desire of our local governments to migrate toward complete streets, provide safety and infrastructure decisions that make sense for all of our users. We want to make sure that we are providing input to you in not just the big picture stuff, but in the implementation of specific projects. Now, whether you consider that input or not, it's up to you because you're the owner of the project and you get to decide how it gets built. But we want to ensure that we're giving you the perspective that's consistent with our TPA governing board's long-range plan, our goals and objectives, to say things like, hey, while you're out there resurfacing a road, put in those enhanced crosswalks, put in the pedestrian countdown signals, put in the separated or at least buffered bike lanes if you have the space for them, so that we can provide enough, we can provide a best use of that infrastructure to provide a safer facility or a safer environment for the people who are going to use that road. And then the other one I wanted to touch on is item 4C, monitoring the status of TPA priority projects. One thing I want you to be aware of, that the TPA by Florida law, not by federal law, but by Florida law, is required to come up with annually a list of priority projects and say to the DOT, these are the things that we think need to be funded in the next 5 years. Let's work aggressively as partners to put money on them and make them happen. When I started with the TPA back in 2013, we had 13 priority projects. That was it. We were working on 13 things. Everything else was somebody else's idea, but those 13 projects were the TPA governing board's projects that they owned. What we've done since I started is we've actually created our local initiatives program. We've expanded our transportation alternatives program. And now with the recent adoption of the 2045 plan, we've said, let's create a third program called State Road Modifications that gives local government additional opportunities to say, on state roads, on county roads, on city roads, these are the kinds of things we want to get built. These are the kinds of things worth funding. Let's make these projects happen. And we've grown the TPA's priority list from 13 back in 2013 to 80 projects today. And we're continuing to add to that list and say, collectively, let's look at our system on a big picture, and then locally, let's figure out what's worth building within our local communities and use the TPA as a vehicle to allocate federal and state dollars, not local dollars, but federal and state dollars to implement the projects that matter most to our local governments. And so one of the things we're trying to do with our monitoring of status of the TPA priority projects is to help you as elected officials know what we've agreed to and how well we're doing in pushing for the concept to construction process to happen quickly. I think those are the things I wanted to highlight on 3 and 4. Any questions on those 2 goals or any of the activities shown there?
We seem to be a quiet group today, Nick.
You do. I think, I'm not sure if this is good or bad, but it's a Monday morning, so we're taking advantage of capturing you on your first or second cup of coffee.
But I mean, 80 projects, holy heavens, from what, 13 to
From
80?
13, yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, we've done a lot to really, it was a question of empowering local government, because when I got here, the TPA's only focus was on the sort of big regional facilities, which still matter. They certainly have a significant impact on our transportation system as a whole. But the whole idea of creating a local initiatives program and saying, we have the money, you as elected officials can choose how that money gets used. Let's create a process for local governments to apply to us for funding and then make projects happen. It opened, I think, Pandora's box in a very good way of saying resources exist and they're available to you as local government to make things happen. All right, last 2 goals. We're going to touch on 5 and 6, collaborate with partners, and then administer the agency. So on 5, I wanted to highlight that we were asked to conduct a research exercise, essentially, on what's happening in other parts of Florida with respect to mobility plans and mobility fees. I'm going to come back to that one in a moment, but I just wanted to highlight that as a placeholder. And then the other is 5C. We were asked to conduct workshops on topics of interest, and a couple of things that really, I think, demonstrate how the TPA can, again, be a resource to us in Palm Beach County were the Transit Peer Exchange. We did that in January, before the pandemic started. We were able to work closely with leaders from Phoenix and leaders from Austin, Texas, to help them, to ask them to come here and then to tell their story about how they started from a suburban, auto-centric land use pattern and transportation system and made a jump to investment in major dollars in a transit network, a high capacity transit network that would provide mobility for the future growth of their areas. We wanted to help our local governments get their head around that because it's a hard question to answer. And frankly, not many places in Florida have answered that well. But at the same time, we did bring in a bunch of Florida transit properties. We had Jacksonville here, we had Metroplan Orlando here, or Lynx, the transit agency from Orlando. We had Forward Pinellas here, and we also had Miami-Dade and Broward County Transit representatives here to say, this is what we're doing in our large urban areas in Florida to help inform Palm Beach County and the decisions that we might be asked to make in the future. On the other one I wanted to mention is we've been pushing hard on this concept of Vision Zero, which is a commitment of local government to build transportation projects that really protect all of our vulnerable users and implement design changes and policy changes that represent a commitment to eliminating traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries. We conducted a Vision Zero workshop back in December of 2019. It was very well attended. Lots of local government staff members were there, and we've seen a lot of fruit come out of that with local governments creating and modifying their own local policies and implementing Vision Zero policies at a local level. Again, because the TPA was able to act as a resource and bring national experts locally to bear on that kind of a conversation. And then as far as administering the agency goes, I want to highlight just 2 here. 6A is, I mentioned this at our board meeting, we want to continue to act as a resource to especially our local elected officials. If there's a place you want to go or a thing you want to see within reason, we want to be a resource agency to help get you there, because we find that when you experience transportation facilities, when you experience the kinds of systems that other places in the world or in the country have been able to implement, you develop a passion and a hunger to do those kinds of things here. And that's good for the agency, it's good for our local communities. And we want to continue to provide you with access to those opportunities through training, through national conferences, through peer exchanges. If there are places that we need to take our governing board members to go and see, So we can, you know, it's one thing to have Phoenix come here and say, yeah, we figured it out. It's another thing to fly out to Phoenix and see what the system looks like in person. So, you know, post-pandemic, when we get to the ability to kind of do those things again, I think that's a question I'd love to have the TPA board help me answer. Would those kinds of events be useful to us to sort of build momentum and create an appetite for the kinds of change that might be possible here in South Florida? And then the other one I want to highlight is 6C, and I've already talked a little bit about this, but it was a significant endeavor to move out from under the county's umbrella and into a new office and meeting space. And we are pleased to report that that is nearly complete. I think we're still tweaking just a handful of little things, but the TPA board facility, the boardroom, we had the audio system complete. We've got 5 out of 6 of the screens up and operational. The projector screens in the room, we're going to have the 6th one up and running this later this month. So we're really excited about the facility that we have now to operate from, and thank you for the initiative and support in that transition, because it was a big deal, and we're glad to have that behind us now. Okay, last thing I want to touch on is coming back to item 5A. And so we're going to jump to one more slide, and I'm going to ask you for input on this. We were supposed to develop this, basically information about what's happening in other parts of Florida. And we have compiled this map with a lot of background, and there's a lot more detail that goes into it than this one-page summary. But we've developed this map to basically say, it's not crazy to consider a migration from a road-based impact fee to a mobility plan and a mobility fee. And again, the difference is road capacity fees are only able to be spent on additional pavement for to be driven on by cars. Mobility fees recognize that transportation is multimodal, that it's not just driving, it's riding transit, it's walking, it's bicycling. And a multimodal or mobility plan gives you the flexibility to spend money collected from new development on additional asphalt for cars, or additional asphalt or concrete for sidewalks, for bicycle facilities, or even the capital component of an investment in a transit system. You can ask a new development to pay their portion of a cost associated with an investment in mass transit. This is a huge hot button issue. And so I have chosen not to present this as an information item to the governing board right now because it's pretty inflammatory. But what I wanted to share with the committee in this context is, it's not crazy. Other people are doing it or are considering it or are in the process of developing a mobility plan and fee. And then the other thing I want you to key in on is the clustering of places that are focusing their attention on this. The kinds of places that are considering a transition from a traditional road fee to a mobility plan and fee are places like Tampa, St. Pete, Orlando, Jacksonville, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. Those 6 are the 6 of the 7 largest urban areas in Florida. Palm Beach County is the 7th. And so when you think about how transportation investments and developer mitigation systems are evolving in Florida, the other 6 large urbanized counties and larger urbanized areas are indeed developing at least an attempt or an intention to migrate from road-based transportation primarily to a multimodal system. I just wanted to share that with the committee, and then I'm really asking you for direction as to whether I'm reading the tea leaves right and saying this is not a helpful presentation for our full governing board at this time. Let's keep it in our back pocket, or whether you think I should push forward and maybe make a little bit more of a well-informed presentation to the governing board. So Madam Chair, I think at that point, I'm done recapping fiscal year 20, and would love to hear any thoughts or suggestions you have on what we've said and how we've done this past year.
Well, I'm happy to take questions from all of our committee members. Anyone have questions?
I do have Commissioner Valashe has a question.
Okay. Hal, why don't you go right ahead? but unmute your microphone.
Suitably inflamed, as you mentioned, it is an inflammatory issue. But I would say that probably need to hold off on the mobility fee because the effect of COVID on the use of mass transit, I think, is going to be substantial. We don't know what it is yet, but I would think, a lot of these mobility plans that have already been adopted are probably going to have to be revised when we see, for instance, at Tri-Rail, what our ridership looks like after a vaccine appears. Before a vaccine appears, I'm sure that's still, a non-normative state. And we can't really draw many conclusions from that. But when a vaccine arrives, will we get the same use of mass transit as we were anticipating before? So, I think it's worth talking about, but not yet.
Anyone else have a question or a comment?
I
Yeah,
have Mayor Pinto.
Okay, thank you.
it's interesting. I thought we were beginning to go down a road of making progress on this conversation before the outbreak of the pandemic. But I agree with Commissioner Valachay's assessment. Now is not the time probably to really address this issue, and we need to get through the pandemic and get through the vaccine phase and kind of see where we are. But I would just like to share a thought process on this. You mentioned, Nick, that this was inflammatory. Let's deflame it. I don't know why it should be inflammatory, because I think our thoughts on this should be, we establish a separate, independent, freestanding fee, tax, whatever we have to call it, that's put in place to address the mobility issues and not have any direct impact on any of the other current funding mechanisms we have in place right now. I think there's this assumption out there that one has to replace the other or step on the other or take funds away from the other, and I don't think that's the way we should be thinking about it. I think our approach should be establish a completely new freestanding fee that's independent, and we're using the term fee, but it might really be a form of some kind of a taxation, and we'll discuss that when the time comes on what it really is. But I just want to share that as perhaps what our thought process should be as we contemplate this at some point when we get to a point where we really want to start moving forward and doing something and having further dialogue on it.
Bob, are you next?
I guess.
Go right ahead.
Well, I find Fred's remarks refreshing. And from the county side of the world, certainly we would embrace the idea of addressing these as two separate ideas, and probably there would be more of an opportunity to have a conversation. Unfortunately, I think, as Nick is pointing out, at this point in time, I don't think that our friends in Palm Beach Gardens are going to be willing to embrace that as the idea as they're pressing forward. So I'm afraid that while that is a very reasonable view in my view, I think that unless and until we can get that idea embraced by not only Palm Beach Gardens, but the other municipalities, we're going to have to go through the pain of this lawsuit and eventually get it ironed out what the county's rights are in demanding that the impact fees continue to be paid, notwithstanding what we'll all agree are changes in the dynamics of our county going forward. So I'll put that to the side for a minute. I'm struck, and I guess when we talk about the future plan, we'll talk a little bit more about the impact of the pandemic, but I guess I'm looking to make sure that we're not just ignoring the pandemic as we're doing our strategic plan going forward. And we're talking about collaborating with partners. I think we need to incorporate in those partners things like our congressional delegation, because certainly as we're looking for federal money, which is going to be necessary in a lot of what we're talking about, we're going to need to be able to work through the congressional delegation to get those into the whatever transportation bills are going to be coming out. I think we can expect and we should anticipate that there's going to be some sort of a stimulus package at some point in time, no matter who takes the White House in November, that there's going to be a reason to jumpstart the economy that's obviously gone dormant. And I think if we take a look at what happened back in 2007, we know that there was a lot of emphasis on shovel-ready projects and putting money into them quickly and basically sidestepping a lot of the planning process. And I think we need to be ready for that. And we need to be putting into our planning process some projects that we could quickly accelerate, expedite, and put on the table as available if there is money, if there's a big pot put on the table and said, grab it if you have something available right now. I would hate for us not to be able to get it. And I'm also on the same subject of collaborating with our partners. Now that I'm on the county, you know, I understand that they're within the county nationwide and also within the state, we have two very valuable partners in FAC and in NACO. And they have very strong lobbying efforts, both on the national transportation system and on Florida's transportation. And I think we need to be leveraging those efforts in our own. And so that, again, I think we need to be collaborating beyond ourselves, looking towards congressional and towards peer organizations, that we, you know, get out of our silo as a TPA and look to others that are doing the same thing within transportation, leveraging them, and again, collaborating and being as efficient as we can in trying to put these projects on the table. So those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Bob. Do you have any other people, anyone else want to speak?
Yeah, I guess I'll make a few comments if I may.
Okay.
I kind of agree with what was said previously about the mobility fees. I think it's a conversation that the board should entertain at some point. I don't know that right now is the perfect timing, considering the impact of transportation with COVID-19. So, but I think definitely as soon as we're on the other side of this virus, we can have that discussion. I think it's needed. I think there's a lot of sides to this issue. We've already heard some being outlined, but I think it's a conversation the different leaders that come to the board at the TPA should have. And then, as you know, I'm enjoying basically what I'm seeing so far. And as we move forward, an issue that I guess I want to address or see is what I consider privatizing of public roads, especially 95, as there is a segment that continues to come up north with taking some lanes into, pay to ride. And I hope that that's something that we can also open discussion about, because I'm not in favor of seeing that continue to move north.
Thank you, Joel. Any other comments?
Madam Chair,
Sure, go right ahead.
I'll just say I generally agree. All of those points, all of you made excellent points, especially given the timing, the need to focus on COVID, and where we are in terms of ripeness for the full board in light of the current situation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just, can I add one other point?
Sure, go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, the point that Commissioner Runruss was making, I think is really, really important in terms of us reaching out and getting out of our silo. I just want to point out that is one of the goals I think we wanted to achieve by having the TPA become independent. It can then be more of a involved in an advocacy role on these kinds of issues, dealing at all levels of government, where in the past they were kind of constrained from doing that because of the structure that was in place before. Is that a correct assessment, Nick?
Well, yeah, I think the bottom line point that you're making is very accurate, especially in conversations like a mobility fee discussion where we have members who see differently on a particular topic. If the TPA is hosted by one of those members, it's hard for us to operate as any sort of neutral environment to facilitate that discussion. And so I think right now we're able to help summarize the various perspectives of our members and then facilitate a discussion that leads to a consensus supported outcome that we could then advocate for at a federal or a statewide level.
Thank you. I do think that we have a lot of challenges facing us because there is so much unknown right now. So to do anything major at this point in time, I think would be adverse to all of us. We really do need to put the mobility fee discussion, yes, it's out there, we've had it before, but I think to bring it to the forefront right now is going to be tough. Between the economy and COVID and the elections and whatnot, I think we just need to stay in our lane at the moment. I do like the fact that we are an independent agency. It was important for us to do that. It helps us make decisions where people can't say one governmental body has more influence than another. Nick, you've put together a great plan here, and I compared it to last year's plan too. So we have done a lot, and you've all done a great job of accommodating us with our virtual meetings. So I know it was interesting having 6 people sitting in the room and trying to figure out how if we were to you were trying to figure out how to do the room in a bigger space, correct? Because you have a meeting of 20 some odd people this week.
We do. And in fact, we have a plan for that. We think we've got a layout of the room that we can make everything come together with still socially distant seating for our technical committee members, not this week, but a week from Wednesday. So they actually have a meeting on July 1st. And we have a plan to operate that meeting with, I think, 25 committee members seated in a not so traditional layout, but it works.
Well, that would be good because it might, depending on what happens at the end of the month, whether we are still able to hold electronic meetings or not, that will help us going forward.
That's right. And I may have mentioned this at the TPA governing board. If I didn't, I want to make sure you hear it now. Originally, the permission to conduct meetings virtually was tied to the executive order, the emergency declaration executive order, which expires July 7th. And then a subsequent executive order by the governor's office extended the permission to June 30th. So it actually, by declaring a specific date in the extension paragraph, he actually shortened the ability to do virtual meetings by 1 week. So now we're on the clock to stop doing virtual meetings and have to meet in person starting July 1st.
But does it look like that is going to get extended or not?
I don't know.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go right ahead, Scott.
On this point, a question for Nick, please. Has council looked at the possibility that even absent the governor's order, virtual meetings can continue? I know the Attorney General gave an opinion that different people have interpreted, but some lawyers have interpreted as saying, yes, boards can continue to meet if they adopt permanent procedures.
I could certainly obtain an opinion. I don't have one at this time that suggests that that's a viable outcome.
Okay.
But you, as a local government body, has BOCA taken that position?
We haven't yet, but my understanding was that there's authority to suggest that boards can adopt procedures, that the whatever came out from the AGO didn't preclude that possibility.
Okay.
Just another comment on that. We discussed this at our last council meeting at the village, and we are having legal counsel somewhat aggressively, we hope, seek a guidance from the state on this issue. We anticipate it'll be not quite an 11th hour decision, but it'll be close to the end of the month before we get anything definitive back from Tallahassee.
Thank you. Anyone have any other questions?
Madam Chair, just to be clear, what I finished doing right there was the recap of fiscal 20.
Correct.
And we have a whole, not a lot, but we have a whole additional set of 6, 7 slides that highlight suggested changes to things that we would focus on for fiscal 21 that we're hoping to review with you next once you're done with fiscal 20.
Absolutely.
Okay. Are you ready for us to proceed in that direction?
I am. I'm looking at the agenda and you're exactly where you need to be. So go for it.
All right.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope I sound okay. This is Valerie. I'm going to be reviewing some of our suggested modifications as a starting point for the new fiscal year actions. So I'll start off with goal 1. Because we already created the interactive comment map, now we want to promote it, and we've suggested an outcome of collecting 500 comments by the end of this new fiscal year. So by June 30th of 2021. That's a suggested change that we're making to action 1A. And then we also, this was more of a, I guess, wordsmith for 1C, but we said conduct or support outreach events and campaigns, and the outcomes remain the same for how many respondents and participants participate in that. So that one's pretty similar, but we're not elaborating on the exact events that we would do, but it's kind of implied. And the update video our goal is still to do that by June of 2021. So are there any comments on these or questions?
You know, we keep pushing the video off. Have we had, being that everything is virtual now, it's probably not that difficult to do a video, but do we really still feel the need for one? Explaining what the TPA does.
All right, Madam Chair, I'll just jump in. The premise was that we were using it as a promotional, I don't know, a promotional item as well as an explanatory item, and trying to raise awareness that the TPA is an independent agency and that is operating out of a different location than any of its subordinate parts. So I think, or composite parts is the right term for that. I think it's still helpful. Okay. We're not going to spend a ton of money on it. We'll do it relatively low budget, but we'll do it. Something that you can click on if you're unfamiliar with what kind of agency you've landed on, and something that you might be able to share with constituents that's relatively short, that says, hey, this is what I do when I go to these TPA governing board meetings.
Nick, is the concept that something would be put together that would be available on a website, so when somebody visited the website, perhaps for the first time, when you click on About Us, it tells them who we are, what we do, kind of?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It probably is a good idea to do.
Okay, any other questions? Go ahead to the next slide, Valerie, thank you.
Okay, so goal 2 is plan the system. On the first action to commence the multimodal corridor studies, we bumped it down to 2 instead of 3 because we realized that these studies are a big effort, and as we discussed with COVID-19, there's a lot of things going on. So this is the suggested change. We're saying let's aim to start 2 multimodal corridor studies per year, or have 2 new ones started by June. For action 2B, this is more of a wordsmith but we want to conduct pedestrian bicycle safety field reviews. We felt the word, this would include looking at safe routes to school, walking and biking to school, but also project reviews. We felt the word audit was a little maybe too technical, but so it's more of a wordsmith for this action, and it's still at least 3 locations in the next year. And then on action 2E, this is a new goal that we're suggesting, and it's to create a complete streets opportunities plan. So what we've done in the past, and we did this with county engineering upcoming resurfacing projects, is that we created before and after typicals of what those resurfacing projects could be versus just restriping the road as it is. So identifying, hey, you have room to do additional improvements, let's include these other improvements as part of that. So this would be actually taking a bigger look at the county as a whole on all the federally aid eligible roadways, county, FDOT, and city roadways, and really especially focusing on our tier 1 network of pedestrian and bicycle facilities that we identified in our long range transportation plan desires. So the areas that we have the most amount of people, schools, jobs, housing, really narrowing in and trying to find opportunities and then compiling that all into a plan. And hopefully this would help our local municipalities identify, have a go-to document to identify projects to apply to us for funding through our local initiatives and transportation alternatives. So that's the idea behind this, having more of a go-to document for complete streets projects.
Anyone have any questions?
I have Mayor Pinto has his hand raised.
Okay. Go ahead, Fred. Unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
There you go.
I have a question about goal 2A. It's 2 parts, I guess. One, have we initiated any studies at this point already? I know we had projected some corridors that we were going to look at. Can we get an update on that? And if we haven't, if you want to go from 3 to 2, what's the priority? Which ones are going to be done and which ones are going to be put on hold?
So we have, as Nick covered in the kind of the recap, we have started on more of a phase 2 for US 1. So we did do the US 1 multimodal corridor study, which was a big effort, a 1.5 year study, but that identified complete streets improvements, which some of them require additional technical analysis. So for example, in the city of Boca Raton, we suggested doing a lane repurposing through their section, and we have started with them to do a traffic study so that they can evaluate the more technical details of that and submit a lane elimination application to FDOT to actually prioritize the funds. So in our preliminary planning study, we said this is a candidate, this would be a good project to do, but FDOT, it's an FDOT roadway, they require a lane elimination application, which is a traffic study, additional public outreach, and a resolution of support. So we did get started on that with the city of Boca Raton. And then on the second one, we're getting started right now on Okeechobee Boulevard, but more of because of COVID-19 and because our current general planning contract ends in December and these efforts are longer, we're about to start on more of a preliminary phase before we do public outreach. So looking at some of the roadway analysis and alternatives, as well as preliminary transit supportive land uses analysis along the corridor. So in this phase over the next 6 months, until our contract with our consultants ends, we would be kind of gearing up for when we do the next phase, which is more public outreach and looking more of getting that input on what the alternatives are for this corridor, so that we have some of that baseline data to show, well, if we do this, this is how it would impact traffic and how we forecast ridership and how we could move people and how it would improve the economic development and some of the baseline health data. So we're getting started on one, but yeah, that's where we're at.
Thank you.
And Mayor, if I can follow up on how do we pick the priorities? Okeechobee is pretty much the strategic east-west corridor that we want to focus attention on. The other corridors get selected in pieces really based on opportunistic circumstances. And what I mean by that is right now there's a resurfacing project on Forest Hill Boulevard that's going to be constructed in 2 years from State Road 7 to Pinehurst. We're looking at that corridor. It's a portion of one of our 561 plan corridors and saying, how can we modify the resurfacing scope to implement components of an enhanced or high capacity transit service? And the same thing is true on Lake Worth Road. There's a resurfacing job from Military to Congress, and we're working with the town of Village of Palm Springs and the DOT on modifications to that design to make it more compatible with a future high capacity transit corridor. There's also a resurfacing job on Boynton Beach from 95 to US 1. We're working on with the DOT on that segment. So it's things like that that we're trying to cherry pick and say, you know, let's do this in pieces and get ourselves ready for a more significant investment, at least a potential conversation about a more significant investment in the future.
Anyone else have any questions for Valerie on this slide?
Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
I'm just, you know, we've had some friction between obviously the TPA and the county. No surprise that that's been there. And I'm looking, when we're talking about planning the system, for maybe a closer collaboration between TPA and county staff. And I'm wondering whether that shouldn't be enunciated as we're talking about planning out the system to ensure that we are, you know, not only working within ourselves, but again, with the municipalities and with the counties, and making sure that we're all, you know, we're seeing the comprehensive plan of each of us as part of the dynamic of planning out the system. Nick?
That's a good point, Bob. And I think something that came out at the, when we were talking about our meeting last week, it really is important for our own staff, our own municipal staff or county staff to really stay in touch with us, the representatives on the TPA, because sometimes if we as TPA members don't have all the information, it's hard for us to relate to everybody else and then to all be on the same page. So I'm doing a shout out to the staff in the gardens, because they, you know, went through everything on the tip and made their comments. So when I walked in the room, I was much better educated on what the needs were for the city. And, you know, obviously representatives from the county, I'm sure that happens with you, and Joelle and Scott and Andy, I'm sure that, and Fred, I'm sure, you know, that happens with you also. But it's something important that we need to make sure that our members are actually talking to the people that are laying out the systems and have that knowledge when they come to a meeting. So Bob, thank you for bringing that up. And it really, we are a partnership. We're 21 members, 5 of which are from the county alone. So we do need to all work in tandem and have our you know, technical committees really have input. And okay, I'll shut up now. Good job.
Madam Chair, if I could ask a clarifying question. I hear the desire for our recommended planning outcomes to be consistent with local comprehensive plans. Would it be helpful for us to do a baseline assessment? Sort of looking at the TPA's long-range plan and whether, you know, how it aligns with various local government comp plans as of right now?
I think that would be a good idea, because I think what happens going forward, if you have a baseline like that, we don't feel like we've come to a cliff and we don't know what to do. So I think if we have some better planning going forward and more partnership, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, because I'll be candid. And I know Councilmember Thompson just said he wanted to speak. Maybe Andy, you go first, and then I'll provide a little more context.
I was just going to say that in the past, the TPA has been sensitive to the local municipality's comprehensive plan. In one or a couple instances in Boca Raton, you all have been. So I think you guys have so far been doing fine on that, but continue to do so, please, because I think that will help educate our decision-making in a lot of different ways.
You know, I find it interesting you say that, Andy, because I know that the city of Boca is having some distress over the planned redesign of the I-95 Glades intersection or overpass. And I think that there was some concern in the city that they were not really being part of the planning process until very late in the planning. So, I mean, maybe you or Scott want to speak to that, but I think that we've seen the same thing on the county. I know, you know, a few months ago we had a little bit of an issue, and you know, I think it's been put to rest at least near term. But I think it goes back to planning. It goes back to us all working together and not being, again, using the word silos, not being separate silos of cities, county, and the TPA all working within themselves and not necessarily all working collaboratively together.
No, that's fair, but the truth is you're missing one of the silos, and that's FDOT, because on the Glades Road project, the TPA and the city have been largely on the same page, and we've shared each other's concerns. In fact, we've discussed, me and Nick have, something to discuss that they have versus the city, and they are generally very consistent. Now, whether the FDOT wishes to listen to and incorporate those concerns or suggestions is another matter, and that's something that Nick can control, or that the TPA can control.
I have to agree with you fully on that point. I'm glad you mentioned it, because the FDOT is a key component. And there are times when I feel that the FDOT pushes a design option that may be contrary to what local municipalities are really comfortable with. And I think we need to get a better handle on I don't know what the right word is, but keeping that on track. And I think maybe one of the mechanisms that we need to leverage more maybe than we are now are the technical committees we have set up. I know I meet with my representatives that we have on those technical committees to make sure that they're in sync with what the council as a whole, from a direction standpoint, is comfortable with and not comfortable with, so that they're not going to these meetings representing our city, you know, kind of independently and not really being plugged into what direction we really want to go or what things we may be concerned about. So I would encourage we leverage those committees more than perhaps we are, and not lose sight of the fact that, yeah, we are having instances, I think, where FDOT is putting forth some design options that may be new and innovative from their view of the world, but maybe not, you know, from the local municipality aren't really comfortable with some of those options.
Well, if you don't mind if I pipe in for a second, FDOT, if you all want to talk to some of our staff up here, we worked really hard with FDOT on the I-90. We're getting a little bit off track for a second, but maybe not. The I-95 interchange at North Lake Boulevard, when they came to us with a diverging diamond, which was going to take a whole lot of right-of-way and basically put a lot of businesses out of business because of all the land they wanted to take. You know, we really fought hard to narrow the street so we could do better, add some turn lanes and whatnot. So I think maybe sharing with the other municipalities about your struggles with a particular project, maybe there's a best case scenario that another city might have already put in place when you're dealing with FDOT. And that really is why, you know, we are a partnership. The TPA is a partnership of municipalities and the county. So if there's something that we have experienced that can help you, we're happy to exchange information. The same thing goes with the Beeline Highway and turning, you know, how the Beeline is going to turn onto North Lake Boulevard. I mean, this is a constant discussion that with all of the workshops has the iterations. I think we're probably on our 6th or 7th iteration of what that turn is going to look like. But we can't we as a whole, as a group, can't let FDOT dictate to us, because they look at it from just one perspective, and they don't often add the human perspective to it, which is what they need to. So a little off topic, but maybe
Sure.
not.
And I think that, you know, in the role of the TPA, you know, we're not the roadway owner, so we don't ultimately dictate, you know, we don't control the roads, but we have the big roadway owners are the county and the FDOT. Our transit desires network that we identified in the LRTP are primarily DOT roads, but our role is more of the champion, is more of the visioning, looking at other data and alternatives of more at the 10,000 foot level. So after we do all that process, looking at, well, okay, the path forward is widening roads and creating interchanges because we expect more traffic. And that's just kind of the roadway owners continue along that path. We are trying to get ahead of the game and looking at the next 25 years, saying, is that the only path? What are the alternatives for this corridor? What would those alternatives look like? What would the positives and negative impacts be of each? What about other data, such as economic development, safety, health data? How many people don't have access to a car along this road, and now we're planning to widen it? So we're kind of at that high level planning and with these studies. And then once we land on a preferred alternative with all the stakeholders, after that comes the more in-depth PD&E and much more in-depth feasibility. We propose things that look feasible based on the data we're looking at, but much more detailed analysis happens later, as in the case with the SMART plan in Miami. So what we're trying to do is kind of paint a different or potential alternatives of a vision and path forward before those projects just continue down the pipeline of widening and interchanges, because that's the only path. So hopefully we can work collaboratively with everyone and in that process of that visioning and looking at the alternatives and figuring out what is the best and preferred alternative for everybody.
Perfect. Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, I have that Mayor Pinto has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Frank.
No, I clocked out.
Okay.
My apologies, I did
else?
that
That's
lower.
okay, that's okay.
All right. We'll move on to the next slide then.
Okay, so goal 3 is prioritize funding. On this one, on the first one, we said instead of providing a list, we found it more appropriate to say provide ongoing funding opportunities, because we hear of grants and other types of funding opportunities out there, and we usually share them at our committee and board meetings, send them via newsletter, share them on our website and social media. So we changed the word to say ongoing instead of just a list. Then on B, we changed it to say, we'll provide the scoring for the next, so our local initiatives and transportation alternatives programs, those are our annual grant programs. And we have a scoring system, which we go through, which is it's objective, and it's based on our priorities, our performance measures, and we bring that to our committees and board every fall, and then adopt it for the new grant year. And that's how the projects will be scored that we get applications. So we changed it to October because that's actually more accurate. That's when we update it instead of December. And then down here, we said to identify safety projects within our TPA priority list. Before we had create a new list of safety projects, but we realized that a lot of the projects that are in our priority list, we're incorporating safety improvements. So we want to identify those and track them. So that's how we updated that action. But those are the main suggestions for this goal.
Okay. Any questions? Moving on.
Okay. Number 4, implement projects. So here, this first one, it's more of a wordsmith again, to provide to review at least 20 projects that are upcoming for DOT, county, and city, and see if there are any improvements that can be made. Primarily, these are resurfacing projects, so they're projects that are just going to go out and be striped the way they are, and we try to identify additional safety improvements and other things that can be incorporated into them. And then,
Madam Chair and Valerie, if I could interject for just a second. I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate the discussion we just had previously about consistency with local preferences into the actions in the strategic plan. One of the items I wonder is maybe we could change 4A to say that when we review projects, we want to review them and promote the TPA's vision and priorities. That's our role. We are your staff and we are trying to implement your plan. But we also want to incorporate or consider local preferences and act as a bridge for local government elected officials and staff to say, okay, we understand the overarching vision, but the details of this project are such that we need it to change a little. And so maybe what we could do is add to 4A to say, we'll do the review to promote the TPA's vision and priorities and consider local preferences. Maybe we could add that phrase along the way to just recognize that the TPA is supposed to be a conduit for local government to exert their influence over the DOT and make sure that projects that are being built within your communities are being built consistent with your desired outcomes.
But if you inserted the word engage the FDOT, county, and city in the design, in the review of the projects and design, so that's less passive, and hopefully we're going to put together workshops or another vehicle to bring us together and make sure we all have a common vision.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think engage is a good term to use.
Absolutely.
Nick, do you think that's the right one for 4A? Because this was the one that, these are basically before the projects are already funded and they're going to go forward, but we're providing kind of pretty soon input, as in like the project's going to happen in the next year. This year we reviewed 65 projects. So it's, for example, FDOT sends out multimodal scoping checklists, and they send them out to each stakeholder. So they do send them to the county, Palm-Tran, the city that the project's in, and us, and then we provide input into that form.
I think it is the right one,
Okay.
because what we're saying is there are some details that you don't see in a comp plan,
Right.
but that matter. And
Right.
we need to engage local government in the review process so that DOT and county, when they're building stuff in a city, are building it incorporating or at least recognizing the preferences of a local entity in the way that project is built. Because it's one thing to do a comp plan consistency review and say, well, our comp plan says there's an interchange at 95 and Glades Road. The DOT is just building a modification to an interchange at 95 and Glades Road. The comp plan doesn't touch on what that project will look like in reality. But then when the design comes out and you recognize, oh, they're going to be crisscrossing the traffic across the interchange because they're doing a diverging diamond, that's going to have significant ramifications to us at a local level as to how our people behave through the interchange. That's where you've got to include an opportunity for their input to be considered as an influential voice in whether that's the right outcome for a project. So I think that's what we're saying is, let's bring people to the table when you get into the details of a project and make sure that the various diverse perspectives are all understood and considered before the final outcome is decided.
Can I add a point to that, Nick?
Yeah.
The notion of the engagement should be in such a way that it's done in a timeline that happens before the project gets so far downstream. And we've got FDOT standing before the 21-member board at the TPA, presenting it as it's a done deal. It's already that far downstream, and then we might find out that there's some discomfort from the locality where it's impacting. The point of the engagement should be is to preclude that condition from occurring, and have that kind of interaction, discussion, and sharing of concerns. But it's not just sharing of concerns. I think one of the things that needs to happen in this engagement process is FDOT needs to make a more rational argument on why they think that design is the right design. and what they perceive to be the benefits that would derive from that, as opposed to other options to address whatever the solution requirement is for that particular area. So to me, that's what the engagement notion should encompass and expand on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? All righty. Next.
Okay, 5. We have 2 more to go.
Lots
5
of
and
changes
6.
on this one.
Yeah. So goal 5: collaborate with partners. Some of what we've been talking about. The first one. So we already discussed the mobility plans and fees. We were tasked by the board to research the current status, and we talked about that. That maybe right now is not the best time to to keep bringing that up to the forefront. So we struck that and we replaced it with a new goal to collect bicycle and pedestrian and bicycle counts at, and our goal is 12 locations. We're actually working with the county right now to deploy 12 locations. Hopefully 10 with the county, 2 with the city of Boca Raton, because the 2 agencies that control the signals in our county are the county and then the city of Boca Raton. So the county and the city have new cameras that are the technology is called Iteris, but they have the capability to turn on this other technology called Vantage Live, which can count pedestrians and bicycles and turning movements at intersections. That service costs additional money. So we worked with the county engineering and asked them, would you allow us to do 10 locations? We'll pay for those counts, that service for a year. And they said, okay, we'll try it out for a year. And then we talked to the city of Boca Raton and they said, okay, for 2 locations. So our goal is to be able to, this data gets published 24/7 for 365 days a year with weather, with a bunch of other information. And we can share that with our cities and with the county and with FDOT or whoever wants to see what bike ped counts have happened, what the trends have been over the year. So that's something that we hope will be helpful for us and for our partners to collect that information. And we're working with the county on that and the city of Boca Raton to test it out for a year. So that's what this goal is, because we get a lot of people asking us, do you have counts for bicycles and pedestrians? So we're hoping that this might be a good solution and maybe increase the amount of locations in the new year. So that's the first a new action under this goal. For the second one, although we would love to have more of our cities become age-friendly cities and be walk-friendly and bicycle-friendly cities, these are designations that you have to do certain actions and involve the community to achieve. We're not really in control of that. So as this year, we weren't able to meet this goal because no new municipalities achieved these designations. So we're saying maybe this is not the best action for us to put as a metric to measure ourselves against, and we'll still help our municipalities and provide assistance if they want to pursue these, but we said maybe it's not the best one to keep in here. So we strike that one, and we said let's assist our local governments with transportation studies and plans, which is something that we're doing now. And when a city or a municipality asks us, we really want to do, for example, a complete streets plan for our municipality, or we want to do a study along this road for complete streets improvements, we offer to be a funding partner to them. So for example, right now we're helping the Indian Trail Improvement Districts who wanted to create a mobility plan for their entire district on how to move people walking, biking, driving on horses, and where could they create a connected network that made sense and that they can pursue. So we're a funding partner to them. So in this is a goal that we're adding in here, and we're saying, let's aim for assisting 3 local governments per year on their studies and plans. For C, it's basically the same thing, but just to save room, we said we want to conduct at least 3 workshops of topics of interest in this new year. And then the last one, a new video, but we thought it might be a good idea to create a complete streets video highlighting projects in Palm Beach County and in South Florida, in Broward and Miami-Dade, highlighting some of the complete streets projects that have been achieved. We think this would be helpful because a lot of times stakeholders don't really know what we're talking about when we say a lane repurposing project or lane elimination. It sounds crazy to them. Or what is a separated or protected bike lane? No one will use it. So we have separated bike lanes here in our county. West Palm Beach has implemented some. There have been lane repurposing projects that have been a huge success here in Broward and Miami, and even more congested areas than where we're at now. So we would like to create a brief video highlighting some of these successes here locally in South Florida, because even if we show it in Tampa or in New Jersey or somewhere else, people say, well, that's not here. So we're hoping, that's the idea behind this, is creating a brief video that's engaging, interesting, and highlights recent projects here in South Florida that are examples of what we're talking about when we say, hey, why don't we do this? We think it really increase safety and walkability for your community, and the people in the room don't know what we're talking about. So that's the idea behind that.
Well, I know a lot of the cities, when we did the Safe Street Summit, had sent in their projects for an award, and maybe we could look through a couple of those to see what cities, what they submitted, and if there was a video that you could do from that. And like a perfect example, City of Palm Beach Gardens, Shady Lakes Boulevard, we used as a complete streets, champion for the winding street, the separated paths, the lighting, and everything else. So that's just a suggestion.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a good
great.
idea. Yeah.
Any
Madam
comments?
Chair, go ahead.
Chair, I was just going to note that Mayor Pinto and Commissioner Balachet have their hands raised.
Oh, okay. Mayor Pinto, go ahead.
Yeah, just going back to what was being discussed about assisting local governments, and I guess you identified the work you're doing with the ITID. I guess my question is, I get confused because ITID is representing an area that is part of unincorporated Palm Beach County. So I guess my question is—
I have to leave. Sorry, Fred. I have a meeting at 10:30. Anything we need to vote on?
Madam Chair, what we're asking for this morning is a recommendation of endorsement of the changes that we've assembled.
Is this the last slide?
We have one more.
Okay, I'm in favor so far, but I have to go.
Thanks, Hal.
Bye.
We have your proxy?
We've got his proxy.
Okay.
All right, Fred, go ahead and finish your thought there.
My thought was just, I just wanted to understand what role the county plays in that kind of a process. It would seem to me that they should be involved because that is unincorporated Palm Beach County. So I just need to understand that a little better, because I get confused all the time with initiatives that ITID gets involved in.
And the county's been involved from the beginning in terms of providing input and especially discussing what could go on their roads. But this was basically an organized request that they reached out to the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, and we have a contract with them, and they asked if we could help be a funding partner for the effort. So we said yes, and this is something that we're doing. We're also a funding partner for the village of North Palm Beach for their lane elimination application study on US 1. To Boca Raton, we're hoping to get started with Lake Worth soon. But when cities want to explore or transportation studies or local governments, and they say, hey, can you help us? Then we say yes. And what we've done to be able to spread out our funds, we've said we will help pay for half of it, up to $50,000 of the effort. And that's been and then we use one of our consultants or Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council as the technical support for that effort.
And Madam Chair, if I can supplement Bower's response.
Go right ahead.
Mayor Pinto, I think what you were asking is why are we doing something with Indian Trail if the county is the owner of the roads? And I think the answer is that Indian Trail does maintain some of the roads within its district. And the other roads that are maintained by Palm Beach County, Indian Trail would like to express preference is for. And much like other local governments who would do a study like this, like in Royal Palm, you might have a comprehensive plan and a mobility plan that says, this is what we will build on our network, on the village maintained roadways. And this is what we would like to see built, and may even provide supplemental funding for on the county roads and the state roads within our municipal borders. And so we're trying to help them come up with that list of what they would like to do on their roads and what they would like to see done on the roads that they don't own, but that pass through their boundaries.
Thank you. Fred, did you get your answer, Fred?
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, I want to go back to Vice Mayor Weinroth's suggestion about looking at our local comprehensive plans and ensuring that what we're doing is consistent with or similar to what's included in those local comp plans. I'm wondering if there should be an activity or an action 5E here that says we're going to commit ourselves to comparing, kind of doing that baseline assessment that I mentioned earlier, comparing our long-range plan project list with what is included in local government comprehensive plans for each of our affected areas. Am I on the right track when I suggest that maybe that's what, Vice Mayor, that you were suggesting, that we ought to be doing some sort of an analysis of whether we match up well or not?
I'd be a little bit more proactive than even that. I think we need to have the people in the same room and do the analysis of the comprehensive plan so that we can have a conversation about it and make sure. I think if the TPA is acting as a facilitator versus just a reviewer, I think that we're bringing some value added versus just being sort of in a ministerial function.
Good.
So you're suggesting that we should facilitate a discussion of our long-range plan projects and the way that they're included in local comprehensive plans.
I think that would be valuable.
Okay.
And again, I think that would forestall the kind of conversations we had 6 months ago with the county.
Angst.
Okay.
So that
Would
that be 5E then now? We're adding something to this?
That's how I'm hearing it. If that seems valuable to the committee, I think I would write it as facilitate discussion of long-range plan projects and their inclusion in local comp plans.
I think that's a valid way to state it, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. In the absence of Hal, I'll speak for the county.
Yeah, we got his support before I added that one, so we'll put an asterisk on it. Yeah.
All right. That looks good.
And I'm going to give you a caveat. I'm going to dive into the weeds for just a second.
That's all right.
It will be an interesting conversation, and it'll be a challenging conversation in some ways because the level of detail in local comp plans varies.
Yeah.
And so what we describe in our transportation funding plan, our long-range transportation plan, is a project with defined limits and a scope of work and a cost. Local comp plans don't always have lists like that. And so to document consistency with or absence of consistency, it'll be an interesting discussion. We might all learn something from the experience. I'll just leave it at that for now.
And I wonder, because with our corridor studies from our long-range transportation plan, we plan to do that similar to the SMART plan, how the TPO did land use analysis and looking at the comprehensive plans of whatever municipalities or unincorporated areas the corridor is passing through, and working with them on looking at what do they have planned, what's their future land use, what would they, what are their thoughts on different on changing that or not. So I think that we are planning to do that with the stakeholders through our corridor studies as well, but those are focused on those corridors and who it's going through. I think what I'm hearing is this would be more of a big picture LRTP comprehensive planned review.
Well, considering all of the cities go to Treasure Coast for when they're doing some changes to their comp plan, I think this sort of works hand in hand. Anybody else? All right.
All right.
Next,
We have,
one more slide.
last goal. Yes.
Okay.
Goal 6, administer the agency. So we are suggesting to strike C because that's done. We moved into the new office.
Woohoo!
Yay. And we came up with a new goal that hopefully we can achieve, but we were thinking maybe we can pursue a distinguished workplace designation, such as great places to work or bicycle friendly business or some other designation that can make us a better place to work, to be a better employer and a better agency. So that was an idea that we added on here. And then for D, we had said we'd provide the comprehensive annual financial report, and we're saying provide quarterly summaries. So that's kind of, it's more of a word tweak there, but it's the same general idea. But that was the only change we had to this goal.
They all look fine. So the 2 changes. Anyone else have comments? And I like the pursue distinguished workplace designations. It's always, it's always good to be recognized. And also when you're in the process of doing that, you see best practices in other agencies and other workplaces that maybe you can incorporate it into your own. So I think that's a good idea. Nick, you're back.
Yeah, I don't know. I lost my internet connection, so I had to switch to my phone.
That's all right. Well, we're on goal 6, and I think we're moving along well. And does anyone have any questions for Valerie on this? Or comments? If not, I think that's the end of our agenda. Nick, you tasked us in the beginning with having someone report this at our next meeting. How about we ask our Vice Chair Fred to do a report for the next meeting? If you're up for that, Fred.
Sure, we'll give it a shot.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, just to clarify, what we'd like to do in July is we'll do the presentation, but we're asking for you as committee members to not leave us out on a limb alone. So if there's pushback or there's questions, we'd really like for you to participate in the response to those questions and say, here's what we discussed and why we thought this was the right way to go.
Just bring your life preserver.
Fair enough.
I think you did a great job, Nick, Valerie. Thank you very much. We seem to be on track, except for where COVID is going to change our traffic patterns, change our gas tax dollars, change our smart streets. And I think you're going to see a change in bicycle patterns and walking patterns. People getting used to riding or walking when they weren't able to take their car during COVID may be just what we need for the future. So it'll be interesting to see where we are in a year from now. After hopefully we have a vaccine and we're back to work in a normal manner. But wish I had a crystal ball. Anyone have any questions?
I'd like your crystal ball when you find it.
Yeah, let's see. I'm looking in my room right now. There ain't nothing in this room that even comes close to being a crystal ball.
All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Just a coffee and a water. That's all I got right now.
So, Madam Chair, just as a conclusion matter, we were
Please.
asking for someone to speak, but we were hoping for a motion so that we could record an official position of the committee.
May I have a motion from the floor?
So I had it as a motion by Thompson and a second by Singer.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And we had Hal vote already, so we're all good. Motion carries.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank
Yes,
you very
we
much.
really appreciate it.
Have
Thank
a good
you.
day. Bye-bye.